Okay.
I'm going to
Um,
share the doc that we have,
yeah, that'd be
if that would
perfect.
be useful.
I just linked the text in the agenda, so people can go there to find it.
Oh, awesome. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so just logistics before we get going with the more interesting details. I was able to find a room for us. The room can sit about 30 people. It should have all the necessary uh, facilities that we need for having a day-long meeting. There's a cafe close by, so breakfast, lunch. I don't know about dinner, but at least breakfast and lunch should be there. And the location is in Sunnyvale. I think earlier I said like Google Mountain View, but it's going to be in Sunnyvale. But it's pretty close. It's probably about like 3 to 4 miles from the previous location. I also mentioned a few nearby hotels that are close to the venue for folks who are going to travel from outside of the Bay Area. Um, and like Derek was mentioning that there could be some socializing events after the day-long event. Um, so we basically have a section where you can add yourself if you're interested in knowing who else is staying there and then meeting them or having a drink with them. Um, that's about it on the logistics side. Any questions there? I just assume that um, no questions means everything is fine. So I guess we just have to go over the agenda now. And I feel like we have two goals with the agenda today. One is to like finalize the different set of items that we need to discuss. We might have to prune this list because we don't have enough time, and also come up with a schedule to discuss these items. It has to make sense logically, and it also has to meet some of the travel constraints that some of us have. Derek, what do you think? Should we just go over each and every item, then make sure that
So
everybody's on the same page?
I guess what Vish and I spent some time yesterday doing was trying to coalesce the input topics that people provided and kind of bucket them a little bit more. And so he and I have a certain view of what these bullet points align to. So maybe we can just talk through each one, and then people can ask questions or clarifying. And then ideally, we'd want owners coming into the face-to-face that have put together some materials to help guide the discussion, so we're not all getting there on step one, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Like that's a very important point because we're not going to have that much time, and like you would lose concentration after like 2 or 3 hours. So it's better to be up to date before the meeting and then have a more productive session during the meeting rather than like try to understand what the requirements are.
So with that in mind, you just want to go through each item. We can talk if there's any questions and cover the scope of what we talked about.
Okay, sure. The first item was actually was added by Jeremy. I'm hoping that he's the one who's going to be presenting it and like driving that discussion. The the main goal there is to list the different types of workloads that Kubernetes is expected to manage, and then figure out at a high level what sort of workloads would Kubernetes be managing natively and which ones it would not, and that will influence the different extensions that we'll have to provide to open source Kubernetes in order to satisfy those additional workload constraints. That's going to be like the basis for the meeting because we need to know what are the different constraints we are working with or working against. Um, so, so the next one is about representing newer resources that have like additional properties and are not as simple as like CPU and memory or just an integer device. Um, like the classical example that has been very popular recently in our community is GPU, where NVIDIA has done a great job in like in like coming up with different requirements around GPUs, and like our current resource model does not represent those is not capable of like representing GPUs. Like there are so many different dimensions that are absent right now, and the goal of this topic is to come up with a different API that can represent newer resources. So for example, like GPUs have additional metadata associated with them, and then there's interrelationship between devices. And so the goal here was to like come up with a new API that can have additional information associated with just the primary resource type. Another example here that Derek likes to bring up often is like wanting a dedicated NIC. So like if you have any additional examples here, feel free to add that. It's going to help us generalize the requirements and come up with a more generic solution. Any questions on that topic?
No, but are we going to come back to the actual time? You mentioned like time scheduling specific slots and whatever. We're going to do this in hour increments and just iterate through, break it up to 5 or 6 1-hour segments during the day, or what do you think? Oh, you've got it. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like, at least like having attended some of the other SIG meetings, like hard time boundaries do not really work, especially if you're going to have like design conversations. Like the best we can do is like maybe if in an hour we don't get to any consensus, then we sort of bike shit on some of the items and then like move on. But if you really want to come up with a conclusive answer, I think we should give ourselves enough time to go over all the different options and like all the different approaches that everyone in the room is going to come up with, and then choose the best one. So I feel like we should give enough time for each topic. And if we happen to finish one earlier, then that's good. Maybe we can get into further depth in that same area. So
I think for your question, Jeremy, the thing I'm most interested in slotting right now is your first item, right? Like I feel like we could dedicate an hour or less just to make sure we're all on the same page. But then
that's fair.
I think the other items, I'm a little apprehensive on time boxing, other than maybe just slotting to particular days.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep that to an hour or less. I'm assuming there won't be too many questions, but yeah, that's reasonable. Definitely not, a lot more than that at all.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Should we just go over all the items first before we try to slot them, or?
Yeah, that's what I think we should.
Okay, so the next aspect is like providing performance isolation. There are actually, I shouldn't say just performance isolation, because this is also taking into account. Well, let me check. Okay, no. So this is just performance isolation. Here, the main requirement is like providing better SLO for access to compute resources. And today we try to provide some basic isolation based on user requirements, but we do not guarantee any tail latencies for any apps. So it's just difficult for an application author to provide like say 3 nines or 4 nines, because they don't even know how much of availability that the underlying system is providing them for access to basic compute resources. So this gets into the issues of like dealing with hardware topology, and then what kind of workloads can we support natively? Which workloads can be run together? What sort of like requirements would be met for these natively supported workloads? Some of the and an extension to this is like requiring very specific modes of isolation. For example, an app is like super latency sensitive, so it requires a dedicated core because it cannot like tolerate any sort of like interference from other apps sharing the same core. So those are examples. Or like the other example that we came up with was like running on CPU 0 specifically for like network applications. So if you have more examples, please feel free to list here. But these subtopics are here to sort of give an idea on like what sort of areas we are trying to cover under this topic.
Yeah, and I think for our chat yesterday, right, we were talking about like we need to understand what we think the default posture is going to be for the kubelet. And then that will help us inform where we would potentially look to differentiate from that default, right? So like, I know yesterday when you and I were chatting, I mean, I have a posture that's often like, I'm just going to spin up a dedicated cluster for this class of workload rather than mix multiple classes of workload on a particular cluster. So I'd be curious if others have similar requirements, but I think there's some tension on whether we think the kubelet or the cluster itself is supporting a mixed set of workloads or not.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it depends on the different requirements, I guess. But it's definitely worth discussing, at least to make sure that everybody is on the same page with respect to requirements. I'm just making sure that I have it down so that we don't forget it. Okay. The next topic, which is a segue from what Derek was mentioning, is that we need extension both at the cluster level and at the node level. This is to support like workloads that are either workloads that are not natively supported by Kubernetes, or it is to support or it's to like have custom behavior for workloads that are supported by Kubernetes. For example, if the native scheduling scheme and native resource management schemes aren't adequate, or they aren't performing well for the given hardware or given like data center requirements, maybe you want to run your own scheduler and isolator at the node level. So this topic is meant to cover those scenarios. I mean, the prime example here is like providing node level isolation, which the Intel folks have been driving quite a bit recently. So that's to come. The aim here is to like get to some conclusion on like whether the proposal we have currently is sane and that like it's worth investing in that direction, and what sort of commitments are we going to have as a community towards supporting that feature. The main concern there is to make sure that like we do not like try to solve the same problem through different means and confuse the ecosystem. So we need to figure out like how we are going to avoid confusion within the ecosystem. I think I already went over scheduler level extension. Maybe I should also be mentioning one other part of the conversation that Derek and I had yesterday, where like Derek was having a classic example of like a submarine that's running apps that are specifically fine-tuned to use underlying hardware, which is a classic example of like doing manual binding. How do we deal with that, right? Like, is upstream ever going to support such a scenario? I think no, but like if that's a requirement for a given set of users, then like how do we achieve that requirement? Is there going to be a recommended means, and do we have the necessary extensions for that? I think like that's the second part of this major topic. The next one is about guaranteeing future availability for resources. Think of this more as like you're going to launch some specialized app that's going to require a specific dedicated core that's closer to your set of GPUs and your SSDs and your NIC. And if it happens that it cannot find a node, like all nodes already have apps that are like running on different devices, and you happen to not be able to start this job, then it's a problem for you. So how do you ensure that a job will be guaranteed resources in the future? There are some ideas and thoughts on how to deal with this, but this is a fairly open topic that we haven't explored as a community yet. The next topic, I think Derek added this, which is about like defaulting policies. How do we deal with like defaulting for resources? Like if we have, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, the way I understood this is that
my take on this last bullet is, I think the first part of the face-to-face, we're going to be discussing a bunch of primitives and things that actually end users don't really want to think too deeply about. And then I think we should ideally close up the face-to-face with how do we make this easier for users to consume. And so, yeah, that's basically like if we end up leaving this with saying we're going to have a more complicated resource requirements section of a container or a more complicated resource attributes part, and we're not doing anything to make it easier for users to reason about these things or write their pod specs, then I think we haven't like solved the whole problem. Yeah, all those things.
I agree. I'm just writing it down just so that I make sure that we are all on the same page.
Yep.
Yeah, like Derek was saying, I think we have some problems, and some of this might be covered in the representation aspect as well. Where like we need to have some same defaults across different application classes, which might make like application deployment much simpler. Like maybe you're just running all of them as burstable, but you need like some defaulting that's not just at the namespace level, for example. And then you also need like some portable resource names. This is similar to like storage classes. So where you have certain classes and then those classes map to like certain set of devices. An example here could be like you say Tesla GPUs that fall within the same class, and then that could map to one of 5 different kinds of GPUs because they all happen to be compatible with each other, and CUDA guarantees that. So that's one requirement there. Or you have a NIC and like you have classes of NICs, and then you have high performance NIC, and you make sure that you get that NIC. The last one, so we felt like the last one is sort of already being dealt with in the community. David Oppenheimer opened up, I don't know if he has, but he has been talking about having a proposal where there's going to be a notion of like first-class notion of like priority, and that should also like sort of solve this problem of like sharing resources between multiple application tiers. Am I missing some other aspects of this requirement?
I mean, the original issue that this owner had opened up was basically, I have big data jobs and I have traditional web jobs, and I want to have them both share the same cluster. So one runs at night and one runs during the day. And then how do we like support fair resource sharing across these class of workloads?
Yeah, David has written a document on adding priority and resource sharing in general.
Yeah.
He shared it already, I believe, a couple of days or maybe several days ago with the team. I believe I have the link to the document. I can send it out. But anyways, that document is sort of like a high-level idea. It doesn't go into like more details. I am going to write another document, which actually a little bit more into the details of how we are going to add priority to the API, and how the preemption is going to work based on the priorities. Yeah, so we have one document ready right now, which we can share, and that's the one that David has written.
Yeah, so I mean, generally I agree. I think the original proposal was very tied to these two classes of workloads, but it really was just a priority preemption problem.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I'm interested in understanding when we talk about priority and prevention, is that like a scheduling decision, or is it a node local decision?
I think it's an overall cluster level thing where it takes into account lots of different aspects. It takes into account quota also, for example.
Like traditional resource quota, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean more like if I have to, I guess I want to know if we imagine there'll be any overlap between this and like what we're going to do with the future of pods. So like if you have two pods that land on the same node that ask for competing priority access to resources, like depending how we do dedicated CPUs or something, will we have to make that decision locally, or is it really just like a scheduler was going to evict one pod and move it to another one?
So performance.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was just going to say that like performance isolation is, at least the designs that I've come across so far, and the one that I have in my mind is that performance isolation is typically involves like two different modules. One is going to be kubelet, and maybe like some other metric sources, and then the other one is going to be the rescheduler, which is going to like try to rebalance nodes based on the observed performance. Because if the node cannot do anything beyond what it's trying to do, it either has to evict or it has to wait for the rescheduler to do that. And you generally think like the rescheduler is the one that should be dealing with that problem. So the scheduler just tries to do a good job in like finding the initial node, but it's not going to care about performance.
Generally true. So maybe I didn't understand the first question correctly, but if we have like priorities already, and assuming that a task with task which is like lower level priority is running on a node, and then suddenly a new task arrives with a higher priority, or somehow the resource requirement of high priority task changes. I'm not sure if Kubernetes currently supports this change of resource requirements. But anyways, if it changes for a high priority task, then the scheduler can evict those lower priority jobs to create more room for high priority ones. But of course, the scheduler doesn't really care about performance in that way, just honors resource requirements.
Yeah, so I guess if I was to summarize it, we're not like defining a priority scheme that says two guaranteed workloads will fight amongst the same node for access over resources, right? Like it's not differentiating within a quads tier. It's just
Sure. Yeah. Basically, are you saying that let's say that both of these two tasks have the same priority, and then is that what you were saying?
Yeah, like today the only thing we really have is quads, and then most of my understanding around priority preemption, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So, but I think it relates to why I'm okay with this being at the end of the agenda, is that it's more like a scheduling fit question, and then how do I evict active pods from that node in response to that fit, versus how do I keep both pods resonant on the node, and maybe only give temporal priority to one versus the other. Like we're not talking about a priority scheme that's going to go like tell us how we're going to reuse CFS shares differently or something, right? Or how we're going to give this the real-time scheduler or some other thing that impacts the node itself. It's more just cluster-wide scheduling views, which to me seems less controversial than like those things that blend how we manifest it on the node and then how we schedule it to the node. So
yeah, that's my understanding too, Derek, that like quaz is the thing that's going to influence performance, and then priority and preemption is more about like admission and feasibility.
Correct. Well, this is not finalized yet, and actually, I guess David hasn't shared that document with everyone. I will let him do that. He told me that he would, but maybe he has forgotten. But anyhow, I sent a link to the document, but I'm not sure if you guys will have access to it yet. But anyhow, at the end of the document, he goes through a few possible options about preemption and preempting various pods. One is like letting kubelet do the preemption, which is a little bit more controversial, as you guys said. And the other one is to let the scheduler decide about preemptions and the priority. Well, priority is something that is defined by the user, but letting the scheduler decide which pods to evict based on the given priorities. and preempt the other ones which are not necessarily needed for. They are if they are holding other higher priority jobs from getting enough resources. Those are the pods that are going to be preempted, and the scheduler is the one who is going to decide.
Yeah, that works for feasibility. It just does
Yeah.
not work for performance.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So basically, performance is sort of implied in the priority. If you really need to guarantee performance for your pods, you need to give them higher priority and you need to ask for enough resources. That's how performance is sort of guaranteed. Anyways, so yeah, there are a couple of options, but most probably everyone is sort of like inclined towards going with scheduler deciding about the preemptions.
Okay. And I personally feel like at least the last aspect is interesting for the face-to-face.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we have time, we can get to that. I had one more topic which we moved to the tentative section, which is that of like building a benchmark for understanding how like what sort of resource access guarantees a given Kubernetes cluster is providing across different workloads. And direct, yeah.
Sorry, we may actually have a project that is open source in time for us to talk about this, which is sensitivity analysis of workloads on Kubernetes.
That's awesome.
So at that point, we could probably, we should have the green light for a soft launch just about that time frame.
Okay, I would love to like discuss and contribute if you can share more details.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, it's listed as tentative, so if you have time, then we can get to it and we can discuss more.
Yep.
Okay, so in terms of, so I'm guessing like the list that we have is already sorted in terms of priority because there's some like logical hierarchy between these different requirements. Does anyone disagree? Okay, so assuming that we all agree on the logical ordering, then I'm guessing we would, like Monday, we would just start with the performance sensitive workloads. Actually, I have a question. Should we be doing the scheduling now in this meeting, or
I don't think we need the schedule now. I think
okay.
As long as people are good with the goals, we can figure out bucketing afterwards. I guess the one thing I'd want to know is if I know
we need to find owners.
Yeah, we have to find owners, but then also just are there certain topics where someone will not be there that day that just you don't want to discuss that day? Like ideally, I'd like to leave Wednesday as like either a hack day of sorts or a day where we revisit things that we kind of tabled, but there weren't necessarily going to be needing to make like key critical decisions on Wednesday.
Yeah, let's try to come up with an optimal schedule, Derek, and then maybe we can have everyone else like chime in on that.
Okay.
And hopefully see if we can like meet your constraints through that.
I would think a list of required reading beforehand, so a concise list of PRs or design docs or whatever that you would expect people coming in with to be prepared.
Yep.
And then also,
also
a list of attendees even. We might be able to, like, I don't know if everyone's going to dedicate themselves for 2 days if they're not traveling in or not. Just how to ensure, without a schedule, how do we ensure the right people are in their room is my point.
Yeah, so the schedule is definitely necessary, and like maybe by tomorrow, Derek and I can come up with an initial proposal, which we can then iterate using this doc. I feel like the more higher priority need right now is finding owners for each of these items because, like you mentioned, someone needs to do the preparatory work of like either identifying existing issues or proposal or like PRs, or actually like coming up with a few proposals to deal with these problems. Or I mean, the simplest thing could be to just have a compilation of different requirements for each of these topics. So for the first one, like Jeremy, you're there, and like you're just hoping that you would take care of everything there. And for the second one, I'm interested in looking at it. If someone else wants to collaborate, I'm happy. I'm happy to work with that person. But so feel free to speak up or add yourself if you want to collaborate on this topic.
I can collaborate on that ish.
Okay.
I'll put my name there.
Okay, sounds good. Bobby, I'm going to volunteer you too because I'm going to need some of your time as well on this.
Sure.
Okay. And then performance isolation at the node level. This is not about extensibility, but this is about what the default behavior for kubelet would be. Derek, do you want to take a stab at that, or is
Yeah, I guess I have a hunch on what I think the default behavior would be.
and then I can add more details to it.
Yeah, so I will take a stab at that.
Okay. So I'm just going to reverse the order.
Hey, Vish.
Yep.
I think in a previous meeting you had mentioned maybe if you could get some information about what the Google policy is like, at least in broad strokes, just as a just that we could use as maybe a discussion point. I think you mentioned
definitely.
there were certain classes of workloads that were supported. Maybe just an idea of kind of the considerations that went into that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the part where I was saying that like I would add more details to what it comes up with. So
Okay.
I'm going to try to gather as much information as possible around like how Borg dealt with different class of workloads.
I mean, just on this one in particular, I guess, Vish, when I'm thinking about this, like if we go for the second bullet, are we really talking about maybe dedicated CPUs and like how much of PCI device locality are we imagining there relative to the first bullet point?
So I mean, ideally, if kubelet can discover devices and the distance or like some notion of like connectivity between these devices, cost of connectivity, then it can be a generic model, right? Like, because performance isolation is at that point just becomes binary, except if it's like NVLink or something that's a little bit more complicated. So even if you have like additional devices and if your application requires like high performance, then it's just a question of like finding the right device for the job. So I think it brings in the topic of like having a generic API for discovering devices on the node.
Okay.
So we do not have an owner for driving the extensibility part of the discussion.
I guess if you and I want to pair up on that, that's fine. Because I guess what I'm anticipating, Vish, is there will be a dividing line where you say no, and that'll be what I want to be able to ensure I can plug into this isolation bit. And that dividing line could be dedicated CPUs, or that dividing line could be NUMA reservation. So I'm still trying to tease that out.
Yeah. Yeah, I assume like you meant manual binding when you said NUMA reservation.
Correct, like potentially ensuring I get NUMA node 0 versus 1.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, that's fine. So should I just add like you and Connor to?
Yep.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. And we need someone to drive the discussion for guaranteeing future availability. Any takers?
I guess to me, Vish, that's where I kind of feel like maybe this bullet can just collapse with as a sub bullet of the number 3 here.
Sub bullet of number.
I think this future availability of resources, to me, that is scheduler level isolation extensions.
It could be that, or it could be just priority, right? Like it depends on how we're going to deal with that.
Yeah,
Like
I guess
maybe.
for my own
Mhm.
desires, I'm not like interested in ensuring that like you don't overcommit your quota relative to your cluster or something. So like to me, that's a priority preemption discussion. I am interested in knowing that like if I've made a scheduling decision, that I can make that scheduling decision at like a granular enough level that I know that I'm not like dynamically being moved around on the local node.
So just to reiterate what you're saying that like you would much rather do a much more fine-grained scheduling where you choose everything, including like what exact devices and like what exact sockets you would give for a job to avoid the problem of like future availability.
Yeah, like I would, to me, guaranteeing future availability to me means, well, maybe the phrasing here could be off. What I want to have is a way of saying that I could potentially have a topology aware scheduler, and as a consequence, I can make topology aware binding decisions that prevent other pods from using that same resource. So to me, this is like how do I bind things that we might think the kubelet is going to do by default. So for
But
example,
how would you? Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think in my example I have in my head right now is basically if I want the cluster scheduler to do the NUMA node assignment versus the kubelet to do the NUMA node assignment, how can I assert that binding to the NUMA node in a way that either a custom isolator or the scheduler can manifest? So this is, to me, this is like today when we schedule things, it's literally pod to node name, and then that's it. But I might need to be able to do something more granular within the node, like pod to device or pod to CPU socket.
Oh, and I believe those decisions, pod to CPU socket, all those decisions should be made by the kubelet on a node.
This is what we've been discussing for 4 months now, right? So there are some times where that's appropriate, and then there are some times where that's not.
So Derek, like, did you consider the scenario where like you have a lot of fragmentation and that you need to somehow
So this
rebalance?
scenario is not necessarily around how do I drive density, more
Okay.
how do I drive reliable outcomes.
Okay, so you sort of like you have enough understanding of like your compute availability that you would sort of like manually handle bin packing.
So I think this goes hand in hand with maybe one of the workload types that Jeremy will present, but like not every workload in the world is going to drive density. Some workloads will go and be okay if I'm only using, if there's 80% Slack resources on the node. It was more important to ensure that no one else touched this NUMA node because I got it.
Well, wait a second here. So, of course, if we add priority and preemption, there is no guarantee that you will keep the resources that you were once assigned forever. So if your priority is not high enough, a higher priority task or pod, whatever, can preempt you.
So I think the key thing I want to call it is like, to me, this is an extension feature. And so that's why I want to group it under the extensions bucket and not necessarily the clustered default behavior.
I see.
And then, yeah, if we want to talk about priority and prevention, I mean, obviously there's other issues when you do this, like how do I exclude myself from vertical pod autoscaling? And potentially how do I exclude myself from priority and prevention? Like that's stuff to think about. But like there are people who don't care about fragmentation as much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, sure. Like I guess like you're saying that you care about only a subset of these issues, but I guess for the project itself, you would still have to like have an answer for the rest of the issues as well.
No, this is why I really feel like this was going to group into when we decide what is the default workload optimizations we're going to make as a Cube project. But like even today, Jeremy and I were talking about various examples of I have a 2-node system and I only ever schedule to node 1, right? Because it's just more important to me that I always get node 1 and no one ever goes on node 2. And so there are environments where that's important, and I don't think that should be the cluster-wide default, but I would like a way of expressing more granular scheduling decisions that the kubelet honors, either via a custom isolator, similar to some of the stuff that Connor's looking at, or what. But to me, this is like an extension feature. So that's why I think maybe we should just group it under that bullet.
We should discuss it, because I have a feeling that all this can be described by the existing rules, like affinity or priority itself after we add it.
That's at a node level, right? We have no intra-container affinity.
Intra-container affinity.
I have no way of saying, if I have a pod that has a container and it has 2 containers A and B, and they need to share access to huge pages, and container A needs to run on NUMA node 1, and container B needs to run on NUMA node 2, like that's a real world use case. And to do that, like none of our existing primitives that are at the pod scope support that, but I want to be able to support writing a scheduler that can define that.
I see. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, Derek, I'm just going to disagree partially with what you're saying. I still feel like I do agree that like we need to know what the default support policy is going to be for the project before we can get to this topic, and that's why it's listed after topic 3. But I still feel like it's separate enough in that like irrespective of what set of workloads we choose, there's still going to be the problem of fragmentation. And so at least for my own sanity's sake, I still want an answer as to how we're going to tackle this.
Sure, but I guess what I want to call it is just that, to me, this falls under what we're going to think of as extension features. And so these will be things that when if we have a bullet here, it's extension features to support additional workloads.
But it's not just additional, right? It's like, even if Kubernetes just supported like whatever existing class of workloads, there's still going to be the problem of like fragmentation, right? Like how do we deal with that? And maybe the answer is just priority, but it's still not clear. I mean, I have some ideas in my mind, but I want to make sure that like we're all on the same page there.
All right, so you just mean general fragmentation. So that, I mean, even the rescheduler has a posture on what your optimal function is, right? Like people might run different optimization functions for rescheduler.
Correct, and its intersection with performance is not really clear at this point.
Okay, well, I suspect we've dived into this enough. I mean, I can write up some stuff on what we thought had on there, and we can iterate on those.
Sure, sounds good. So should I just add you as the primary owner? Okay. Okay, and pod presets, or like the general idea of like defaulting and providing ease of use. Anyone wants to take it up? Bobby, you and I had a discussion with Brian on this topic. Do you think you would be able to like grow one of Brian's thought babies and come up with a proposal?
I doubt it. I mean, in the remaining time, I'm not so sure.
Okay. I mean, if you don't have an owner for it, I think like you should probably keep it at the end, because then it's going to be too difficult to get everybody up to speed. You can maybe try it.
Yeah, let's leave it for the end. Let's see if we can find an owner. But I doubt it, because I will probably have to work on a priority and preemption as well. So it's a little harder for me. Yeah.
And there's resource sharing. I feel like hopefully David would be there, and maybe he can help drive the discussion. And Bobby, like you can also help drive this.
Yeah.
You're already working on it.
Yes.
Okay. So looks like we have owners for all these items. Okay. So we'll go ahead and like have a draft agenda. I mean, it's going to follow this very same schedule, or like very same order. And like you can feel free to like post comments or thoughts once the basic framework is there. We should also like try to meet for a group dinner either on like Monday or Tuesday. If we can know the number of people who are going to show up, maybe we can choose a location based on that. I'll try to like add a section here to find out who is interested in a group dinner, and then maybe we can like try to coordinate that.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm done unless someone has questions.
Thanks for summarizing all this, Vish. And let's see. So I had nothing else in addition to add. I don't know if folks are going to have time and for next week's meeting to maybe give a preview of some of the things that we were talking about or wanting to discuss. But otherwise, right now, I had nothing on the agenda for next week, as I assume we're going to be getting up to speed on this. But did anybody have anything that they wanted to get more urgently discussed in next week's meeting?
Well, only looking from the outside, some of the topics are still fairly broad. So I don't know if it makes sense to kind of add one level of granularity in terms of if you could be more precise around your goal. It's like, is there a decision you want to make? I want to decide if you're going to want to go this route, or goal is enumerate options within for this particular thing. It does it make sense, or maybe not?
Totally, and that was one of the reasons why we were trying to identify owners, because it felt like one of the responsibility for the owners is to like enumerate the different decisions that you're trying to make and the different constraints that you're working with.
Okay, so maybe that's something we can revisit next week.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so this assumes that all the owners would have some form of rough draft for these topics by next Tuesday.
That seems fair.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's better. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks, Vish.
Thanks, everyone. And I will look to do the painful process of getting this uploaded to YouTube again. But sorry about the Zoom stuff in the beginning, and we'll catch up with you all next week.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.